The Starliner Daedalus was a beautiful ship. It was long and sleek, built not for war but for comfort. Its job was to carry people between the stars in peace and quiet. Inside, the ship was warm and bright. The gentle hum of the engines was a sound you could feel in your bones, a constant reminder that you were traveling through the vast, dark emptiness of space in a bubble of light and life. Min-jun liked that hum. For him, it was the sound of home. He was an engineer on the Daedalus, one of the best. He had a special talent for understanding machines, especially the complicated heart of the ship, the quantum drive core. While other people saw a confusing mess of wires and energy, Min-jun saw a beautiful, logical puzzle. He could listen to the hum and know if everything was working perfectly or if there was a tiny, almost invisible problem starting to grow. He moved through the clean, wide hallways of the ship, nodding to people he knew. He was a quiet man, not tall but strong from his work. His hands, though often smudged with grease, were clever and careful. He had left his home on a busy colony world years ago. He loved his family, but he wanted a life that was his own, away from the memories of his childhood. On the Daedalus, he had found that life. It was orderly and predictable. There were no surprises. He was in his small but comfortable room looking at a screen showing the ship's engine readings when a message appeared. It was a simple text from a sender code he knew very well. It read, "Appa, I'm coming. ETA 48 hours. J." A real easy smile spread across Min-jun's face. Appa. It was what she had always called him. It meant big brother. The message was from his younger sister, G.A. He leaned back in his chair, feeling a warmth in his chest. G.A. He had not seen her in too long. While he had chosen a life among the stars, she had chosen a very different path. She had stayed on their home colony and joined the Colonial Defense Force. He was proud of her, of course, but he also worried. The CDF was not a safe job. He imagined she was finally taking some leave. He had always told her to visit him, to see the amazing sights the galaxy had to offer. He pictured her showing up in a traveler's clothes, her eyes wide with wonder at the ship and the stars. For the next 2 days, Min-jun found himself watching the clock. He made sure his work was done early. He cleaned his room even though it was already tidy. He felt a nervous excitement, the way he used to feel before holidays when they were children. When the time came, he waited in the main docking bay. The air was cool and smelled of metal and recycled air. Small shuttles came and went, bringing new passengers and supplies. Finally, the shuttle from his sister's flight slid into its assigned spot with a soft hiss. The door opened and people started to walk out, looking around at their new temporary home. Then he saw her. G.A. walked down the ramp. But she was not the sister he had pictured in his mind. She was not dressed like a tourist on vacation. She wore dark, sturdy cargo pants and a simple gray jacket that looked like it had seen a lot of use. Her hair, which he remembered as being long, was now cut short and practical. It did not frame her face softly. It was just out of the way. She carried a single, heavy-looking bag slung over one shoulder. But it was her eyes that made Min-jun pause. They were the same dark eyes he remembered, but they were different. They did not look around with wonder or curiosity. Instead, they moved quickly and efficiently, scanning the entire bay. He saw her glance at the ceiling, noting the locations of the security cameras. He saw her look at the other doors, judging how many exits there were and how quickly she could reach them. She was not seeing a beautiful starliner. She was assessing a territory, looking for potential dangers and advantages. Then her eyes found him, and the sharp, soldier-like look vanished. It was replaced by a bright, familiar grin. The serious lines on her face smoothed away, and for a moment she was just his little sister again. "Min-jun," she said, walking quickly towards him. "G.A.," he said, stepping forward and pulling her into a tight hug. She hugged him back, and he was surprised again by how solid she felt. She was not just fit. She was strong, her muscles hard and defined under her jacket. She felt less like a person and more like a piece of well-made equipment. When they pulled apart, he tried to make a joke to cover his surprise. "You didn't have to dress up for me," he said, gesturing to her practical clothes. She laughed, and it was a good sound. "You know me, Min-jun. I travel light." She shifted the heavy bag on her shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "I see that," he said. "I'm just glad you're here. I thought you'd never take a vacation. I have so much to show you." The observation deck has a view of a nebula that will take your breath away. And the food in the main hall? His voice trailed off. He saw her gaze drift away from him, back to scanning the room. She was listening to him, but a part of her was still working, still watching. The prickling feeling of unease returned to him, stronger this time. "This is more than a vacation, isn't it, GA?" he asked, his voice quieter. Her eyes snapped back to his. The grin was still there, but it was smaller now, tighter. "Can't I just want to see my big brother?" she asked. "Of course you can," he said. "But you look ready for a fight, not for sightseeing." GA looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding what to say. She sighed softly. "Let's get to your room first, okay? It's good to see you, Appa. Really, it is." Minjun nodded, but the happy, excited feeling he had carried for 2 days was gone. It was replaced by a cold knot of worry in his stomach. His sister was here, but she had not come to see the stars. She had come for a reason, and he had a terrible feeling that reason was not a good one. He picked up her bag for her, it was incredibly heavy, and led her out of the docking bay, the gentle, familiar hum of the ship now feeling less like a comfort and more like the quiet before a storm. The gentle hum of the Daedalus was a sound Minjun had learned to love. It was the sound of everything working as it should. For 2 days he had tried to ignore the worry growing inside him. His sister GA was here in his small room. She had smiled and laughed and asked about his work. She seemed like the sister he remembered, but he could not forget the way her eyes constantly watched everything. She was always aware of where people were, of where the doors were. She was like a guard on duty. Even when she was sitting on his couch drinking tea, he decided to show her the engineering level. Maybe sharing his world would help her relax. As they walked, he pointed out different parts of the ship. "This corridor leads to the main life support, and down there is the access to the primary power conduits." He was proud of his ship. He wanted her to see its beauty. GA listened, but her responses were practical. "How many security doors are between here and the engine core?" she asked. "Are the ventilation shafts large enough for a person to move through?" Minjun stopped walking. "Gia," he said, his voice gentle. "Why are you really here? This isn't a social visit. I know you. Please just tell me." She looked at him, and for a moment the soldier's mask fell away. He saw concern in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but that was when the universe broke apart. A deafening roar filled the ship. It was not a sound from inside the Daedalus. It was a sound from outside, a terrible tearing of reality itself. The floor jerked violently beneath their feet. Minjun, who knew every vibration of his ship, felt a wrongness that made his heart freeze. The beautiful, steady hum of the quantum drive turned into a choked, dying gurgle. The lights flickered wildly, and the emergency alarms began to scream. A voice, tight with panic, came over the ship-wide communication system. "All crew to emergency stations. We have been forcibly pulled from quantum travel. Repeat, we have been—" The voice cut off into static. "GA!" Minjun shouted, grabbing a wall handle to keep from falling. GA did not grab for a handle. She dropped into a low crouch, balancing perfectly on the shaking floor. Her face was hard and focused. All the pretending was over. This was what she had been ready for. "They're here," she said, her voice cold and flat. "Who's here?" Minjun asked, his mind racing through possibilities. A drive failure? A meteor shower? But he knew, deep down, it was neither of those things. Before she could answer, the main view screen on the hallway wall flickered to life. The beautiful starfield was gone. In its place was a ship. It was not a human ship. It was a nightmare of dark, jagged metal that looked like twisted bone and sharp teeth. Red lights pulsed across its surface like a diseased heartbeat. Then a face filled the screen. It was a face from a bad dream. The skin was a scaly gray-green. The eyes were yellow slits, like a snake's. A ridge of sharp, bony plates ran over its head. It opened its mouth, showing rows of needle-like teeth. "I am Commander Cathar," a harsh, guttural voice hissed through the translators. The sound was full of menace and cruelty. "Your ship is now the property of the Cathar Ascendancy. Power down all systems. Prepare to be boarded. If you fight, you will be destroyed. If you obey, some of you may live to serve." The screen went black. For a second, there was only the sound of the blaring alarm. Then the sounds of screaming began from other parts of the ship. Minjun felt a cold terror wash over him. The Cathar. Everyone knew the stories. They were raiders, slavers. They did not take prisoners. They took property. They were the monsters parents warned their children about. "We have to get to the escape pods. Minjun said, his engineer's mind kicking into gear. He turned to run towards the nearest pod bay. Ji's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. Her grip was like iron. No, she said. They will have already surrounded the pod bays. It's the first thing they secure. Going there is a trap. Then what do? He asked, his voice shaking. We hide. We fight back. We survive. She let go of his arm and swung her heavy bag off her shoulder. She unzipped it quickly. Inside, Minjun did not see clothes or personal items. He saw a compact military-grade plasma rifle disassembled into parts. He saw blocks of dense-looking material he recognized as explosives. He saw medical supplies and packets of high-energy food. You knew, Minjun whispered, staring at the bag. You knew this was going to happen. I suspected, she said, her hands moving quickly, snapping the pieces of the rifle together with practiced ease. My unit intercepted coded Cathar transmissions. They were targeting a high-value starliner on this route. I couldn't be sure it was the Daedalus, but I couldn't take the chance. She looked up at him, her eyes full of a fierce love. I came for you, Appa. I came to keep you safe. The sound of heavy, clanking footsteps and energy blasts echoed from a nearby corridor. The Cathar were on the ship. The screaming got louder, mixed with the terrifying guttural shouts of the boarders. Come on, Ga said, slinging the assembled rifle over her shoulder. She handed Minjun a small, powerful-looking pistol. Do you remember how to use one of these? Minjun looked at the weapon. He had done basic firearm training years ago, but he was an engineer, not a soldier. His hands were made for fixing things, not for fighting. He nodded slowly, taking the cold, heavy pistol. I remember. Good, only use it if you have no other choice. The sound will bring every one of them right to us. She led him away from the main hallway into a narrower service corridor. The lights here were dimmer. The air was cooler. This was the part of the ship most passengers never saw, the veins and arteries that kept the body alive. They moved as quietly as they could. Ga moved like a shadow, stopping at every corner to listen before peeking. Minjun tried to copy her, but he felt loud and clumsy. He could hear his own heart pounding in his ears. They heard a group of Cathar soldiers before they saw them. The aliens were speaking in their rough language, laughing as they smashed open a door. Ga pulled Minjun into a small storage closet, closing the door until only a crack remained. They watched as the Cathar dragged a crying man and a woman from the room. The aliens were huge, taller and broader than any human, encased in dark spiked armor. Please don't hurt us, the woman begged. One of the Cathar backhanded her across the face. She fell to the floor, silent. You are cargo now, the Cathar soldier snarled. Cargo does not speak. Minjun felt a hot anger mix with his fear. These were his shipmates, his friends. He started to raise his pistol, but Ga put her hand on his, gently pushing it down. She shook her head, her eyes saying, not now. It's suicide. They waited until the Cathar moved on, dragging the two unconscious people with them. Ga opened the closet door. They're gathering everyone in a central location, she whispered. Probably the main lounge. It's easy to guard. We have to help them, Minjun said. We will, Ga replied. But we can't help them if we're captured too. We need a plan. We need an advantage. She looked at him, a new idea forming in her eyes. The engine core. You know it better than anyone. Can you do anything from there? Can you cause a distraction? A power surge? Something that would mess with their systems? Minjun thought for a second. His mind, which had been frozen with fear, began to work on the problem. It was a technical problem. This was his language. Yes, he said, feeling a small spark of hope. The primary power coupling. If I reroute the emergency batteries through it, I could create a localized EMP burst. It wouldn't hurt the ship, but it would fry any unshielded electronics in a few key sections. It could knock out their comms for a minute or two. Maybe disrupt the locks on the doors. A grim smile touched Ga's lips. That's my brother. That's our start. Let's go. They moved again, deeper into the belly of the ship, heading for the engine room. The sounds of the invasion were all around them. They were two small people in a very large, very dark maze, and the monsters were already inside. Minjun held the pistol tightly, following his sister, trusting her completely. The quiet, orderly world he loved was gone, replaced by chaos and fear. But he was not alone. The journey to the engine room was a nightmare. Every shadow seemed to move. Every distant clang of metal made Minjun's heart jump. Ga led the way, her movements silent and sure. She was like a different person, a hunter in her natural environment. Minjun did his best to follow, his engineer's mind clinging to the simple plan: get to the engine core, cause a distraction. It was a technical problem, and that was something he could understand. They reached a heavy, reinforced door marked Main Engineering, authorized personnel only. GA held up a hand for him to stop. She listened at the door for a long moment, then nodded. "It's clear, quick." Minjun pressed his hand to the security panel. It lit up green, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. They slipped inside, and the door closed behind them. The engine room was the heart of the Daedalus. It was a vast multi-level chamber dominated by the massive, silent form of the quantum drive core. Normally, it was a place of controlled power and loud activity. Now it was eerily quiet. The crew was gone, probably captured. Only the dim emergency lights were on, casting long, dancing shadows. "Okay," GA said, her voice a low whisper in the huge space. "Do your work. I'll watch the door." She moved to a control console near the entrance, crouching down so she was hidden, but could still see through the small window in the door. Minjun didn't waste a second. He went straight to the main engineering station. His hands flew across the screen, pulling up schematics and power flow diagrams. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but now it was pushed down by focus. This was his world. These were his machines. He began rerouting power, bypassing safety protocols. He was essentially preparing to give the ship's local power grid a controlled heart attack. He was so focused on his task that he didn't notice the quiet hiss of the main door opening. But GA did. Two hulking Cathar soldiers stepped into the engine room. They were scanning the area, their heavy plasma rifles held ready. They had not seen Minjun yet, but it was only a matter of seconds. GA did not make a sound. She moved. She was a blur of motion coming up from behind the console. The first soldier sensed something and started to turn, but he was too slow. GA's foot swept out, kicking the back of his knee with a sickening crack. The alien roared in pain and stumbled. Before he could fall, she drove the hard point of her elbow into the side of his head, right where his helmet met his armor. He collapsed to the floor, unmoving. The second soldier was faster. He swung his rifle towards her. GA dropped low under the swing and came up inside his guard. She grabbed the rifle barrel, forcing it upwards, and slammed the heel of her other hand into his throat. He made a choked, gurgling sound. She twisted the rifle from his weakened grip, spun it around, and slammed the stock into his head. He joined his partner on the floor. The whole fight lasted less than 5 seconds. It was not a fight. It was a dismantling. Efficient, brutal, and silent. Minjun stared, his hands frozen over the console. He had never seen anything like it. He knew his sister was a soldier, but this was something else entirely. This was an art form, and its subject was violence. GA picked up one of the Cathar plasma rifles, checking it quickly. "How much longer?" she asked, her voice still calm, as if she had just taken out the trash and not 2 giant alien warriors. A minute. Maybe 2. Minjun stammered, forcing his hands to start moving again. "Work faster," she said. She dragged the 2 unconscious bodies behind a large power converter, hiding them from view. Just as Minjun was initiating the final power sequence, a voice, loud and amplified, boomed through the ship's intercom. It was Commander Cathar. "All humans. The fight is over. You will assemble immediately in the main lounge on Deck 3. Anyone found hiding will be executed. You have 5 minutes. Minjun looked at GA, his face pale. "They're gathering everyone. What do we do?" "We stick to the plan," she said firmly. "The EMP will create chaos. It might give people a chance to run. Finish it." He typed in the last command. A warning flashed on the screen. "EMP burst ready. Activation on your mark." "Mark," GA said. Minjun pressed the button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights in the engine room flickered violently. A wave of invisible energy pulsed out from the core, traveling through the ship's wiring. On the console, screens showing status reports for other parts of the ship suddenly fizzed with static and went dark. The distant, constant hum of the life support system stuttered for a second. "Good," GA said. "Now we need to move. They'll know it came from here." But as they turned to leave, the main door to the engine room slid open again. This time it was not just 2 soldiers. It was a full squad, and standing in the middle of them was Commander Cathar himself. The alien commander was even more imposing in person. He was taller and broader than the others, his armor more ornate, covered in scars and trophies. His yellow slit-pupil eyes swept the room and immediately landed on Min-jun, who was still standing by the main console. Cathar ignored Ga completely. He took a step forward, his clawed finger pointing at Min-jun. "You," he hissed. "The technician. You are the one who caused this disturbance." He gestured to his soldiers. "Take him. He has spirit. He will be useful." Four Cathar soldiers moved forward, their weapons raised. Min-jun backed away, his heart pounding. There was nowhere to run. Suddenly, a plasma bolt sizzled through the air, hitting the floor right in front of the lead soldier's feet. Everyone froze. Ga stepped out from behind a console, the stolen Cathar rifle held steady in her hands. She was aiming directly at Commander Cathar. Her face was a mask of cold fury. The soldiers swung their rifles toward her, but Cathar let out a low rumbling sound that might have been a laugh. He looked at this small, unarmored human female who dared to point a weapon at him. It was absurd. He turned his gaze back to Min-jun, who was now being grabbed by two of the soldiers. "Do not worry, little human," Cathar said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Your female will be dealt with. She will learn her place." The soldiers started to drag Min-jun towards the door. He struggled, but it was useless. He was an engineer, not a fighter. He looked at Ga, his eyes wide with fear and apology. Cathar took a step closer to Ga, completely dismissing her as a threat. He was focused on his new prize. He was so confident, so sure of his power. That was when he asked the question. He didn't even look at her as he said it. He was watching Min-jun being dragged away. The question was filled with pure, seething annoyance. It was a question for a piece of furniture that had suddenly made a noise. He gestured towards Ga with a flick of his claws and snarled, "Who is she?" Min-jun, in a final desperate act to protect his sister, yelled out, "She's no one. Just a passenger. Let her go." But Ga was done hiding. She was done being ignored. She stood her ground, the rifle still aimed. She heard the commander's dismissive question. She heard her brother's desperate lie. She turned her head and met Cathar's gaze. Her eyes were like chips of black ice, and then she grinned. It was a terrifying expression full of promise and sharp edges. "I'm his sister," she said, her voice clear and cutting, carrying easily across the large room. The grin widened, showing her teeth. "And your death." For a single, frozen second, no one in the engine room moved. The only sound was the faint, strained hum of the ship's systems struggling after the EMP burst. Commander Cathar stood perfectly still, his reptilian face processing the words. The grin, the sheer unbelievable defiance. His yellow eyes narrowed, the slits becoming even thinner. A low, dangerous growl started deep in his chest. Then chaos erupted. Ga did not wait for them to react. She moved first. She dropped the heavy plasma rifle, it was too slow for close work, and instead of running away, she ran forward. She dove behind a large cylindrical coolant tank as the Cathar soldiers opened fire. Bolts of superheated energy sizzled through the air where she had just been standing, scorching the metal walls. The soldiers holding Min-jun were distracted for a crucial moment. Their grip loosened as they turned to see the fight. It was all the chance Min-jun needed. He wasn't a soldier, but he was smart and desperate. He drove his elbow back as hard as he could into the stomach of one guard. The armor absorbed most of the blow, but the surprise made the alien grunt and let go. Min-jun twisted free from the other's grasp and scrambled away, diving behind a bank of computer terminals. "Find her. Kill her," Cathar roared, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "The technician is mine." The Cathar soldiers fanned out, their heavy boots clanking on the metal grill floor. They moved carefully now. They had seen what she did to their two comrades. This human female was not a simple nuisance. She was a threat. Ga was a ghost in the machine. The engine room was a forest of massive machinery, conduits, and walkways. She knew how to use it all. She moved through the shadows, staying low. She appeared between two pipes, fired 2 quick shots from her pistol, and vanished again before the return fire could find her. One soldier cried out, clutching his arm where the plasma bolt had burned through a gap in his armor. She wasn't trying to win a stand-up fight. She was doing what she was trained for, guerrilla warfare. Her goal was to disorient, to injure, to make them afraid of the dark. Min-jun crawled on his hands and knees, staying hidden. He could hear the shouts of the soldiers and the sizzle of energy weapons. He needed to help. He couldn't fight, but this was his room. He knew every circuit, every system. His eyes fell on a panel labeled Atmospheric Control Sector 7. That was this room. He pried the panel open with his fingers. Inside was a complex web of wires and controls. He could vent the atmosphere, but that would hurt GA too. But he could do something else. He found the control for the fire suppression system. It used a dense, inert gas to smother fires. It wasn't harmful to breathe, but it would create a thick, blinding fog. He looked over the top of the console. He saw GA. She was pinned down behind a large power relay. 2 soldiers were advancing on her position, while another was moving along a high walkway to get a clear shot down at her. She hadn't seen the one above. Min-jun didn't hesitate. He crossed 2 wires. A loud hissing sound filled the engine room. White fog-like gas began to pour from nozzles in the ceiling. Within seconds, the room was filled with a dense, obscuring mist. Visibility dropped to almost 0. The Cathar soldiers shouted in confusion. The one on the walkway lost his target. In the fog, GA became a true phantom. She could hear the clumsy, heavy movements of the armored soldiers. They were loud and disoriented. She was quiet and knew the layout by heart. She used the sound of their footsteps against them. A soldier stumbled through the fog, his rifle held out in front of him. A shape emerged from the whiteness to his left. He turned, but it was too late. GA's vibroblade slid neatly into the weak point under his arm. He fell with a gurgle. She caught his rifle before it could clatter to the floor. Another soldier heard his comrade fall and fired blindly into the fog. The plasma bolts went wild, hitting machinery and causing showers of sparks. GA moved around him, a silent shadow. She used the butt of the stolen rifle to strike the back of his helmet, hard enough to stun him. As he staggered, she disarmed him and shoved him hard into a high-voltage conduit. There was a flash and a scream, then silence. Commander Cathar stood near the door, furious. The fog was so thick he could barely see his own hands. He heard the sounds of his men falling one by one. They were not sounds of a fair fight. They were sounds of an ambush. This human was hunting them in their own hunting ground. Fall back, he bellowed. To the door now! The fog began to thin, the gas dissipating into the ventilation system. As it cleared, the scene was revealed. 4 Cathar soldiers were on the floor, disabled or dead. The remaining 2 stumbled back towards their commander, their weapons shaking. GA stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily. She held a Cathar rifle in her hands. Her clothes were smudged with soot and a little blood, none of it hers. She looked at Cathar, her expression cold and unwavering. Min-jun stood up from behind his console. He saw the fallen soldiers. He saw his sister, standing alone against the monstrous commander. He felt a surge of pride and terror. Cathar looked at the carnage. He looked at this one female who had single-handedly destroyed his elite squad. The humiliation burned worse than any weapon. His prize, the technician, was still free. His mission was falling apart. He raised his own larger plasma cannon, aiming it directly at GA. A clever trick, he snarled. But tricks are over. He fired. GA was already moving, diving sideways. The plasma bolt tore a molten hole in the floor where she had been standing. The remaining soldiers opened fire, forcing her to keep moving, ducking and weaving between machinery. She was fast, but she was running out of cover. Min-jun saw it all. He saw Cathar lining up another shot. He saw GA about to be trapped. He acted without thinking. He grabbed the small pistol GA had given him. He stood up, aimed at Cathar, and fired. The shot went wide, hitting the doorframe next to the commander's head. But it was enough. Cathar flinched and turned his rage towards this new insolent threat. You! Cathar roared, swinging his cannon towards Min-jun. It was the distraction GA needed. While Cathar was focused on her brother, she broke from her cover and sprinted not away but towards the high walkway. She climbed the ladder in seconds, moving like a spider. Cathar fired at Min-jun, who ducked back behind the console just in time. The console exploded in a shower of molten plastic and metal, the force throwing Min-jun backwards onto the floor. He lay there stunned, his ears ringing. Cathar laughed, a harsh grating sound. He walked forward, believing the technician was finished. He didn't see the figure above him. GI stood on the walkway directly over Cathar. She didn't have a clear shot at his armored body, but she didn't need one. She saw a heavy maintenance tool, a large, solid metal wrench, hanging on a hook on the walkway's railing. As Cathar stepped forward to finish off Min-jun, GA lifted the heavy wrench and threw it down, not at the commander, But at the power coupling on the ceiling directly above him, the wrench struck its target with a loud metallic clang. The coupling, already stressed by Minjun's EMP, shattered. A shower of sparks and a length of heavy, superheated conduit fell from the ceiling. It landed directly on Commander Cathar. The weight and heat drove him to his knees. The molten metal of the conduit fused with the armor on his back and shoulders, pinning him to the floor. He screamed, a raw sound of pain and fury, trapped in a cage of his own broken ship. The two remaining soldiers stared in horror at their fallen commander. They saw Ji standing above them on the walkway, looking down like a judge. They saw Minjun slowly getting to his feet. Their will to fight broke. They dropped their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. The engine room was suddenly quiet again. The only sound was the ragged, pained breathing of Commander Cathar, pinned and helpless on the floor. Ji climbed down from the walkway and walked over to her brother. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft again. Minjun nodded, wincing. "I think so." He looked at the defeated alien commander. "What do we do now?" Ji looked around the room at the captured soldiers and their trapped leader. A small, tired smile touched her lips. "Now," she said, "we take our ship back." The fight was over, but the battle for the ship was just beginning. The engine room was secure, but the rest of the Daedalus was still under Cathar control. Commander Cathar was trapped, his body fused to the hot deck by the fallen conduit. He thrashed and snarled, but he was going nowhere. The two surviving soldiers stood with their hands in the air, their weapons on the floor. The fear in their yellow eyes was clear. They were not looking at soldiers. They were looking at demons. Ji kept her rifle pointed at the prisoners. Her body was tense, ready for any sudden movement. "Minjun," she said, her voice all business. "The comms. Can you get shipwide communications back? We need to talk to the crew, to the passengers." Minjun, his ears still ringing from the blast, nodded. He moved to a secondary console, one that had survived the fight. His fingers, though shaking slightly, flew across the screen. The EMP had been short and localized. Most systems were already rebooting. He found the communication controls and began rerouting power, bypassing the damaged sections. After a minute of work, a green light appeared on the panel. "We have it," he said. "The intercom is live." Ji took a small device from her pocket and linked it to the console. "This is Corporal Ga of the Colonial Defense Force," she said, her voice calm and strong, echoing through every corridor and room of the Daedalus. "The Cathar commander has been neutralized. We have retaken engineering. The tide is turning." She paused, letting the words sink in for the people hiding in fear all over the ship. "Listen carefully. The Cathar are not invincible. They are bullies, and bullies fall apart when you fight back. We have their weapons. We have their fear. Now we need you. If you are free, find a weapon, a fire extinguisher, a heavy tool, a piece of pipe. If you are trapped, be ready. When you hear fighting outside your door, be ready to help. Fight for your ship. Fight for your lives." She cut the transmission and looked at Minjun. "That should get them started. Now we need to deal with this." She gestured towards the prisoners. She walked over to the two Cathar soldiers. She did not speak their language, but she did not need to. Her meaning was clear. She pointed her rifle at one of them, then at the heavy bindings used to secure cargo. She pointed at the other soldier. The soldier understood. He quickly used the bindings to tie up his comrade's hands and feet. Then Ga motioned for him to lie down. She used another set of bindings to tie him up as well. They were now helpless. Next, she went to Commander Cathar. He glared up at her, hissing and spitting. "You will die for this human filth," he snarled. Ga ignored him. She looked at the conduit pinning him. It was too hot and heavy to move safely. He was not going anywhere. He was more useful to them right here, as a symbol of the broken invasion. "The Cathar who are guarding the main lounge," Ga said to him, her voice cold. "How many?" Cathar just glared, refusing to speak. Minjun had an idea. He went to the communication console again. He pulled up the ship's internal sensor network. It was damaged, but it could still detect life signs and group them in broad areas. A large, dense cluster of human life signs showed in the main lounge on Deck 3. Around them, he could see a smaller number of separate, non-human signals. "I count maybe 8 Cathar guards around the main group of prisoners," he said. "Good," Ga said. "That's manageable." She looked at her brother. "You should stay here. Guard them." She pointed to the prisoners. Minjun shook his head. A new determination was in his eyes. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by something else, purpose. No, he said firmly. This is my ship. These are my people. I'm not a soldier, but I can help. I know this ship better than you do. Better than they do. I can get us there without using the main hallways. G.I. looked at him for a long moment. She saw the set of his jaw, the resolve in his face. The scared engineer was gone, replaced by a man defending his home. She nodded. Okay, lead the way. They collected the weapons from the fallen Cathar soldiers. Minjun took a plasma rifle, feeling its unfamiliar weight. G.A. was now heavily armed. They left the engine room, sealing the door behind them. The Cathar inside were not going to cause any more trouble. Minjun led her through the labyrinth of service tunnels and maintenance shafts. These were the secret passages of the ship, never seen by passengers. He moved with a new confidence, pointing out shortcuts and hidden doors. As they moved, they started to hear sounds. Not the sounds of Cathar control, but the sounds of rebellion. There was the crash of metal on metal, shouts of anger, the sizzle of a plasma bolt followed by a cheer. G.A.'s speech had worked. The crew and passengers were fighting back. They reached a vent that looked out over the corridor leading to the main lounge. 2 Cathar guards were stationed at the door, looking nervous. They were hearing the same sounds of fighting from other parts of the ship. Before G.A. could move, a group of 3 kitchen staff, armed with large metal cooking knives and a heavy pan, rushed around the corner. They yelled, surprising the guards. One guard was hit in the head with the pan, stunning him. The others swarmed the second guard, disarming him and tying him up with torn aprons. G.I. smiled. See, bullies? She and Minjun dropped from the vent into the corridor. The kitchen staff jumped, then saw they were human and let out a relieved cheer. The door is locked from the inside, one of them said. We can't get through. Minjun went to the control panel. I can bypass it. It will take a minute. He started working. From inside the lounge, they could hear shouting and the sound of weapons being charged. The remaining Cathar inside knew they were in trouble. Get ready, G.A. said to the small, growing group of freed humans behind them. They held their makeshift weapons tightly. With a final button press, the door to the main lounge slid open. Inside, 6 Cathar guards stood with their backs to a large group of terrified prisoners, their weapons aimed at the door. They looked scared and cornered. G.A. stepped through the door first, her rifle raised. It's over, she said loudly. Your commander is defeated. Your ship is being taken back. Drop your weapons and you will not be harmed. The lead Cathar guard snarled. We will take you with us, human. He started to raise his rifle, but he never got the chance. From within the crowd of prisoners, a man suddenly stood up. He was the ship's chef, a large, strong man. He threw himself at the guard, grabbing his weapon. At the same time, other passengers, empowered by the sight of G.A. and their freed crewmates, surged forward. It was not a fight of weapons, but of sheer numbers and rage. The Cathar were overwhelmed in seconds, buried under a wave of angry humanity. It was over. A great cheer went up in the lounge. People were crying, hugging each other, checking on their friends. The fear was gone, replaced by a shaky, overwhelming relief. Minjun and G.A. stood together by the door, watching the scene. The ship was theirs again. The battle was won. Later, as the crew worked to restore full control and tend to the wounded, Minjun found G.I. on the observation deck. She was looking out at the stars, the nebula he had wanted to show her, painting the view in brilliant colors. She looked tired but peaceful. He stood beside her. You saved us all, he said quietly. She shook her head. No, I just started the fight. You and everyone else, you finished it. You saved yourselves. She looked at him. You were brave, Appa. I'm proud of you. Minjun put his arm around her shoulders. The hum of the ship was back to its normal, steady rhythm. The quiet order had returned. But he was different now. He knew what his sister was, and he knew what he could be. They were not just a family. They were proof that humanity, when pushed, would always push back. Together they looked out at the infinite stars, safe once more in their small, bright bubble of light and life.